What is up my people, and welcome back to Technological Journey episode 7. In episode 6 we finally set up the gold line. We also automated sodium persulfate, which will allow us to craft many circuits, and we used that to craft our first refined circuits. In today's episode we set up some much more robust autocrafting infrastructure, which will allow us to autocraft the majority of recipes we've unlocked so far. We also craft the remaining refined circuits that we didn't get around to last episode, including our first EV circuit. And finally we'll prepare some titanium ingots in preparation for a trip to the moon next episode. That'll be a lot of progress through the quest book into the HV chapter, and most importantly it will be a large infrastructure investment which we'll be very thankful for later down the line. So, in between this episode and the last episode, I haven't done too much. I've just sort of done a bit of cleaning up around the base. Now, as you can tell here, our biodiesel line and our polyethylene line are no longer here. That would be because I moved them down here into the chemistry room. So here we have our polyethylene line. I also upgraded the brewery to advanced, which means we're now brewing sugarcanes into biomass much quicker, which essentially allows us to produce polyethylene at a faster rate. Biodiesel, I didn't upgrade any machines, but I did move it down here and connect it up to the applied logistics system. And in order to get those things to run down here from interfaces alone, I connected up both the coke ovens and the farming station to our applied logistics system via interfaces and item conduits. That means we're no longer running with ender tanks and ender chests, which is lovely, and it means our base is now entirely run off of our applied logistics system. And all of the fluids that we were previously handling in ender tanks we now have over in main fluid storage. So we have glycerol, we have biodiesel, creosote oil, and polyethylene. Now polyethylene I had level limit to stop once we've got 100 buckets, which would be 100,000 millibuckets, just because we don't need more than that at the moment. And biodiesel I've got level limit to stop once we reach 1 million millibuckets or 1,000 buckets. The reason I've got the biodiesel so much higher is because this is essentially our fuel buffer. So a large buffer of this essentially takes the place of a battery tower. That means that if for any reason we stop producing biodiesel and the entire base runs out of power, or runs out of fuel, then everything isn't going to shut down for at least a solid 10 minutes, and that's usually enough to identify and fix the problem. So, the first thing I want to do for today is I want to set up our autocrafting infrastructure. Now, there's a bunch of things I pinned up here in our JEI. By no means is this an exhaustive list, but this is just a bunch of things that I feel like I've, just off the top of my head just now, I pinned that I feel like we need and use quite a bit. So these are going to be the items which I'm going to focus on initially to get up in autocrafting. Some of these are quite nested, like for example the piston needs an electric motor, small gears, rods, cables, all of these things, so this will probably take quite a while. But before we get into that, I just want to set up a better way of producing steel, and ideally to hook that up to our applied logistics system, because aluminium, which is our MV ingot, we're automatically producing from the cobble works and then smelting in that EBF there. And I find it kind of strange that we've automated the MV ingot before we've automated the LV ingot, and I'm constantly running low on steel. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to upgrade this blast furnace, or primitive blast furnace, to a industrial primitive blast furnace. Now, as I mentioned, I think it was in episode 1 or 2, there is a recipe for steel which uses oxygen and iron in a EBF, although that's not as fast as an industrial primitive blast furnace, because you can actually put multiple inputs and outputs on the same thing to paralyze the craft. Okay, so with the passive blast furnace now set up, as long as we have iron ingots in our system, which we need to get through mining, we will constantly have a, I've set to 300 buffer of steel ingots. Now we can up this later, but it's just at the moment we're kind of short on iron, so I decided to leave it at 300. So now, in order to get most of this automation up that I want, we're going to need more interfaces. So I want an interface, both a fluid interface and a normal interface, to be the first things that we set up on Autocraft fully. And in order to do that, we're going to need to get cables first for these pistons and all of the different components we need. And to do that, we're going to use polyethylene, so we need polyethylene foil. Now I'm going to craft the foil on demand, but I'm going to passively stock the polyethylene sheets. So I've just come back down here to the chemistry room, and on the back of this line here, which I think is our gold line, I'm just going to chuck down a fluid solidifier, a fluid interface, a normal interface, put the plate mould in here, stock this interface for polyethylene, put a fluid regulator on this side, set to input. Now a fluid regulator is just a pump and two circuits with IC1 in an assembler, and essentially what this allows you to do when used as a cover, if you go screwdriver, is rather than a pump, it allows you to supply exact, keep exact, or transfer any. Now I want to use the keep exact mode, and the reason I'm using this fluid regulator rather than a normal pump is because I don't want to fill this up with 64 buckets of polyethylene, because obviously that takes a while to craft to our system here, and I don't want to waste it. So if we look how much we need for a sheet, so it's 144 millibuckets. So if we go to keep exact and we set this to 144 millibuckets, this is going to constantly keep 144 in there, no more and no less. Now the supply exact mode basically just transfers any, but only in batches of whatever you set here. Keep exact will keep exactly that amount. And I also want to set this to import. And then I'm going to wrench it to this side, and I'm going to turn on auto item output just so it automatically outputs the sheets here. Now I've set up a drawer over in main storage for polyethylene sheets so this doesn't clog up our system. So I'm going to add a machine controller on the bottom which turns it on and off with a redstone signal, chuck down a level emitter, and I'm going to set this to polyethylene sheets. Now I'm just going to keep probably 300 in at a time. In fact I might even do less because we don't need that many, because one sheet obviously goes to 4 foils. So I'm just going to keep 200, and then I'm going to hook all of this up to our applied logistics network. The wiring down here is a bit messy, but I mean we can sort that out later, it's not too big of a deal right now. And this is running perfectly, so we're getting polyethylene come in through the interface, it's getting stocked at 144 millibuckets, and it's getting output into this interface, which is then exporting it up into our drawer system here, where we currently have 98 polyethylene sheets. Now I've got to mention this, I think it was last episode, but in one of the comments on the last episode somebody actually mentioned that you can create 4 ME covered cable just by putting some normal Fluix cable in an assembler with 2 polyethylene foil. So I'm using this because 1, it's cheaper, and 2, I actually kind of prefer the look of it. And you can also dye it later, which I think is quite cool, and we can add some nice designs to the base using that. So I just want to thank whoever dropped that comment to let me know, because you've saved me a lot of crafting up Fluix cable. Alright, so now that we've got our polyethylene sheets sorted, we are ready to set up some more interface automation. So I've torn up everything here that we had before, and put all of the patterns and everything that we had in this chest so that we can re-encode them. And I've just plopped down our LV machines here, or the ones that we need for autocrafting for now here, and I'm going to have the MV line here. So the LV machines are being powered by a single HV diesel generator being transformed down and transformed down again into 16 amps of LV, so we can run 16 machines off of this. And then the MV line currently is just being powered by a single diesel generator because I didn't have enough circuits to make another HV one. Now there is some cable loss here, but we're going to sort of deal with this in a bit once we've got some better circuit production and we can make more HV ones. Now I also did just have a conversation in the comments of one of my other videos, I think it was episode 5, and I was talking about how energy works and cables in GregTech Community Edition. Now apparently, according to the Technological Journey Discord, it's a bit of a bug and it's not supposed to be working this way, but the way that I originally thought was you had to use 16x cables in order to transfer 16 amps no matter what. So if you wanted to transfer 16 amps you needed 16x, 8 amps you needed 8x, but apparently that's not the case. Apparently you can use the tier of cable that matches the amount of energy, or the amount of amps, sorry, that you input per block space. So the cable tier is based off the highest amount of amperage that you input at a single block space. So that actually means that a bunch of these wires here, well these ones not necessarily, but a bunch of wires down in the chemistry room can be lower size essentially, which saves a lot of materials and crafting materials. Now I'm not going to change the lines that we've already built just because they're already functioning, and I mean I don't really need to go back and tear them all out, but from now on I will be trying to stick to that and use that technique where possible. But in terms of the interfaces, let's get this sorted. So as usual we just need to, I've already wrenched these, so if we just screwdriver all of these to allow input from the back side, and then we place down the interfaces that we need. I should have enough here for these. Now I haven't got the advanced circuit assembling machine yet, but I'll sort that one out later. And I was also told in the comments of one of the other videos that interfaces don't need to be wrenched necessarily in this case because they don't output into other interfaces, which just saves an extra step. So like I said, the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to set up some tin cables on automation. So we already have 4 wire patterns encoded, so I'm just going to go ahead and chuck those in the wire mill interface here, and that's copper wire, copper nickel wire, red alloy wire and tin wire. Now we didn't have a pattern previously for polyethylene foils, so I'm just going to go ahead and encode that now. And if we chuck that in the cluster mill interface just here, so we can now make polyethylene foils, and then in order to make the cables we need to go over to this assembling machine here, and we need to load it with our integrated circuit on IC24. And then if we go back to our pattern interface, we can encode the recipe for tin cable in an assembler. Now when we do this, we want to make sure, 1, that we get the one with polyethylene foils and not any other foils, and 2, that we remove the integrated circuit from the recipe, because we don't want to make an integrated circuit each time we're making the recipe. And we want to put that in here. And another thing I forgot to do was turn on item auto output on all of these machines. So we should be able to craft tin cables now, although I just realised I haven't connected this up to the applied logistics system. So I'm going to go ahead and sort that out real quick. But now if we go over to our terminal, we should be able to automatically craft tin cables. So let's make 10 just to test. Start. So first we're making the wires, and then we're making the cables. Yep, it's all coming through. Perfect. So now I have a lot of pattern encoding to do, just to get up a bunch of other recipes using the machines that we've got here. And then we can move on to probably looking at circuit autocrafting. I managed to move our molecular assembler setup over here, and this is going to fill up this trunk section here, and we'll have another one here, and we'll probably replace these boilers at some point when we don't need them anymore. And I also got about 10 to 15 patterns crafted, but I realised that in order to get the pump, we need to do this assembler recipe here, which means we either need rubber, styrene butadiene rubber, or silicon rubber. Now the other two are chemicals that we need to follow a sort of a line for. So for now I'm just going to go for rubber. Although, unlike we did previously, I'm not just going to do it by extracting rubber plates. I'm going to do this recipe here, which just uses raw rubber pulp and sulfur. Now sulfur we already have on passive, and raw rubber pulp is as simple as centrifuging sticky resin. And that also gives us glue, which is a key ingredient for making circuit boards at low tiers. And the way we're going to go about doing this is we're going to place a centrifuge on top of our polyethylene sheet solidifier, and then we're going to place a chemical reactor up here. Then we're going to connect these things to this interface using item conduits, and the same thing on the other side for fluid conduits. We're going to set the conduit on the interface to extract on green, always active, and insert on brown. And then we're going to configure these two sides here to insert on green and extract on brown. We're going to put an item filter in the centrifuge to specify sticky resin, and we're going to put a limited item filter on the chemical reactor to specify 9 raw rubber pulp and 1 sulfur dust. And then on the fluid side we're just going to have it extract on brown, both of them, and insert on brown into the fluid interface here. Now on both of these extracts I'm going to set it to active without a signal, and then I'm going to put 2 level emitters, 1 fluid and 1 item behind the 2 outputs, with the chemical reactor having a fluid level emitter and the centrifuge having an item level emitter. I'm going to set the fluid level emitter to stock 100 buckets of rubber and the item level emitter to stock 1000 raw rubber pulp. And then I'm going to connect this up to the applied logistics system. Now the wiring here is a bit tricky because I want to cover this up here, so we can't go outside. So I've crafted up these ME conduits, which are relatively simple to craft, and that's basically just ME cable that can fit within these conduit bundles here. So I'm just going to wire it along here and connect it to the interfaces here, which will hook it up to the system. So now these two are online. So now when these two level emitters fire, it will stop the extracting from these machines, and it will essentially do the same thing as if we had a machine controller, without having to bring a level emitter around the front here and do some funky wiring. The last thing we need to do is we need to stock resin, sulfur and raw rubber pulp in this interface here, and then the system should all be up and running. I've hooked up two new fluid tanks, one for rubber and one for glue, with the glue being a possibility for this overflow trash can here. And then if we go over to our storage drawers, I'm going to put our raw rubber pulp in there, and then the recipe that produces raw rubber pulp, it also makes plant balls as a byproduct. So it actually looks like we've run out of space in this wall of storage drawers. So I'm just going to extract something here which we're not making on passive at the moment. So I'm going to just take these building blocks out. How do I do this? I need a key. Right, so I need to go get the key. Then if we switch one of these drawers over to plant balls, lock it again and add a void upgrade on. Now we don't need a drawer for mist at the moment, which is why I've switched it, but if it turns out that we do need one in the future, we're going to end up building this second wall of drawers here very soon. So now we've got automated rubber production, we can work on some more patterning coding, but one step that we have to do before we do that is to install some more machines. Now under here I added a couple more generators, so the HV one, and I've got another MV one going up into our MV side line over here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to place down 4 more interfaces. I'm going to chuck down an advanced assembling machine and 3 advanced extruders. Now this assembling machine here I'm going to fill with rubber and an integrated circuit 1. So that should allow us to autocraft conveyor modules as well as electric pumps. So I'm actually going to rip these up just so we can screwdriver the back, because I've got to do that. And we can place them back down and turn on item auto output. And these extruders are going to be for bolts, rotors and medium pipes. So I need to go ahead and craft up the shape cards for those. And we will chuck in the first one to be bolts, and then rotors. I put this in the wrong slot, and then medium pipe. Now going back to this assembling machine here, the way I'm going to stock this with rubber is I'm going to use a fluid regulator, and the reason I'm doing that instead of using a pipe is, a normal fluid pump, is just another way of sort of regulating the amount of fluid that we put in so we don't overdo the amount of rubber. So it looks like the maximum amount of rubber that we're going to need for these recipes at the moment is 864 millibuckets. So I'm just going to set this to 1000 just to save a bit of time. So that's a keep exact, and then we're going to place an ME fluid interface on top, and we're going to request rubber in there, plop that in there, and then I'm going to hook this up to our system just with 2 Fluix cables connected to this interface here. And there we go, so it's stacked now at 1000 rubber, and I've got to put in the integrated circuit, so there we go. So now we're ready to start encoding some more patterns, and we should have everything we need here to get the interfaces, the majority of the components at LV and HV. LV and MV, sorry. So as you can see here, I've encoded most of the components and a variety of other patterns that we need. And I've also started work on getting automated refined processes. And when I say automated, obviously not passive, but on demand. So I've encoded most of the prerequisites here. So I've done all the SMDs, I've done the fine tin alloy wire, I've done CPUs, plastic circuit boards we're yet to do, and setting up the machine for it we're also yet to do. But before we get into the next step, there are a few things that I'd want to passive. The first thing that we want is lubricant, because in the cutting machine at the moment we're running water. And for the recipe to craft these CPUs, which we need for the refined processors, we can either do it in a cutting machine with water at 60 seconds, or we can massively reduce the time by using lubricant at 15 seconds. And that's super easy to make just by using creosote oil and redstone, both of which we have a fair amount of. And then soldering alloy is going to be the thing that we put into our circuit assembler to create the circuits at the bottom here, you can see. Now this requires antimony, and it also requires tin. Tin's easy enough to get, but antimony we have to get through ore processing. So when I set this up on passive, I am going to store it in main fluid storage, but just for now I'm going to store it with sort of the lowest possible buffer that we can get. So I'm probably only going to store like 10 buckets of it, maybe even less. And then I'm going to use a fluid regulator up on the circuit assembler just to minimize the buffer in the machine as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and get them set up now. So we're stocking 50 buckets of lubricant in this super tank here, and then I started up the second wall of fluid storage here, and we're storing, it's level limit to 10 buckets, but because of the way the system works we've got a little bit over 10 buckets of soldering alloy. I've already stocked the cutting machine with lubricant, so that'll speed up the recipes, and I've placed down an advanced circuit assembling machine here. So if we turn this interface here into a normal half block one, and we set this to import, I'll keep exactly 1 bucket of soldering alloy in here. It is a bit overkill, but I guess it's not the end of the world. Chuck the soldering alloy in there, and now when I place this interface down, I just want to talk about this quartz cutting knife, because what this allows you to do is it allows you to name the interfaces. So as you can see here, every interface I've got here I've also put a name on, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the way that this cutting knife works is you can just right click, type in a name, and it's basically like naming it in an anvil, only you don't have to. So I'm going to go ahead and name this circuit assembling machine, and then MV, because that's obviously what tier it is. And then let's just hook up this interface with some covered cable, like so, and this should fill up the soldering alloy and stock in here. Lovely. Now the reason I'm naming these interfaces is because I made this interface terminal here, which essentially allows you to view all of your interfaces that you've got on the network from one place, which is really useful for inputting and extracting patterns. Now I've got a naming system, which I'll talk about in a second, but I just wanted to mention that all of the interfaces that are either passive or basically anything that we don't use for on-demand crafting, I've just pressed this button here which hides it on the terminal, which just means we only see the interfaces in the terminal that we need to input or extract patterns for, which is very useful. Just keeps the interface clean. And now for the naming system, so what I've done is I've got the name of the machine first, and then a hyphen, and then I've got the tier of the machine, and then if it has an integrated circuit I've put IC1. If it doesn't, then I'll just put NIC for no integrated circuit, and then I'll do F dot the fluid that we're using in that machine, and if there's no fluid, which I think we've got some down here, I would just put NF for no fluid. So that just allows me to quickly insert and extract things into the interfaces, without having to run over. And another cool thing for debugging is you can press this to highlight an interface. So if we select our alloy smelter one and press highlight interface, not only does it give us the coordinates, but you can see there we also have a flashing red square. And if we go over here, this should be our alloy smelter interface. Yeah, there we go. Now I'm not sure how long this lasts for, but it does stop eventually. So if we ever need to find an interface that was causing issues, then that's an easy way to do it. Now the final thing that we need to set up before we can autocraft our refined processors is we need to set up the production of these plastic circuit boards. Now the way I'm going to do this, initially I'm going to set it up to passive the actual plastic circuit boards themselves and then craft the good plastic circuit boards on demand. Although in the future, when we unlock this multi-block here called the LCR or the large chemical reactor, I'm going to do the plastic circuit boards on demand. I said plastic, we're going to use all sorts of other types of circuit boards as well, and we're going to do them all on demand once we unlock that multi-block, because that allows us to batch craft and speed up the recipe massively by using higher power tiers. But before we get that, it's quite slow, so I'm going to passive them at the moment. Now the recipes here aren't too complicated, just requires sulfuric acid, copper foil and polyethylene sheets. Copper foil, easy enough to make. Sulfuric acid we've made before in our polyethylene line. It's as simple as combining water and sulfur trioxide, which is just made with oxygen and sulfur. And then we turn that into a good plastic circuit board with some sodium persulfate and copper foil. Now I'm going to do this one on demand, even though we don't have an LCR, just because it's only 5 seconds at the moment, so it's not too bad. So I'm just going to go ahead and get that set up, and then we should be ready to set up our refined processors on demand. So I've gone ahead and set it up next to our soldering alloy setup here, and it's nothing too complicated or anything that we haven't seen before. We're just producing sulfur trioxide here with sulfur and oxygen, goes into this chemical reactor, mix it with water to make sulfuric acid, which goes into the final one here with polyethylene sheets, which we already have on passive, and copper foil, which we're just making up here through a bending machine to a cluster mill, and then that makes us our plastic circuit boards. I've got this level limit to stock 100 in the system at a time with a machine controller on the final chemical reactor, and then that's just being stored up here in this drawer. I've also put down the chemical reactor here at LV with sodium sulfate stocked in here with a fluid regulator on top, and I've encoded the recipe for good plastic circuit boards and put it in this interface here. I've also gone ahead and encoded the recipes into our circuit assembling machine for the first refined processor and the second refined processor. So we now have those available on Autocraft. So if we wanted to do a refined assembly, for example, let's just request one. For the sake of it, we just press start, and first it makes a circuit board, and then if we go over here to the machines, we should see it all in action. So it's already doing it in the circuit assembly machine, and there we go. So it should be in the system, and we should have two now. Yeah, so that's perfect. So now we can look at getting our refined computers, which are the next stage of refined circuits, and we need them for our first EV circuits. But these, similar to the computers here in electronic circuits, require superconductor. Now this requires MV superconductor rather than LV superconductor. And this isn't too complicated again, it's just annoying because you have to craft up all these pumps. But pumps we have on Autocraft. Tiny stainless steel pipe is easy enough to get, it's just stainless steel. And the base wire, obviously we get through wire milling the base ingot, which we get in a blast furnace through the base dust. Now the base dust is made with magnesium, cadmium and oxygen. Magnesium we're getting in our system currently just through smelting some ore, which I went out and mined. And then cadmium we are getting through processing chalcopyrite. So we just crush it into crushed chalcopyrite, crush the crushed chalcopyrite into impure piles of chalcopyrite, and then chuck this through the centrifuge here, and we get a 33% chance at getting some cadmium. And if we just crush up some magnesium in here, let's just speed this along. We get our magnesium dust. Now if I go and grab some oxygen, I'm going to use the other tank because that one's full of drilling fluid, and we chuck these things in a mixer here, like so. As you can see in the top left, it's a 33.6 second recipe, and that will get us 12 base MV superconductor dust. So then we just need to go ahead and chuck that through our blast furnace. Now I'm going to use this blast furnace here that's currently producing us aluminium, just because we've got a decent stock, and I'm crafting up some more silicon balls in here, which I want to keep running just because it's an extremely slow recipe. So this is our first batch here, and if we just chuck this into the EBF, if we temporarily take out this integrated circuit just so it doesn't run an aluminium recipe instead, and there we go. So we're making up some base MV superconductor ingots, and then we just chuck that through the wire mill and then combine it with some pumps to get our superconductor wire, and then we're ready to get our refined computers. Now I'm just going to go ahead and encode this in our pattern terminal, so we're ready to go ahead and make it when we've got the superconductor ready. So it will be this recipe, I believe. Now for now we're going to make these RAM pieces, probably, actually you know what, I'm going to add another precision laser engraver, and I'm going to put a green lens in it and just hook it up onto our auto crafting system, and then we should be able to make these refined computers on demand, excluding the superconductor wire of course. So I auto crafted a bunch of MV pumps, and now we have 30 MV superconductor wire. Now that means that we should have enough to craft up a couple of refined computers. So to start with I'm just going to do one, and it says we have all the ingredients that we need, so if I press start we should see it start to work. So first off it's making the plastic circuit boards. Now if we go over here just to check that it's all functioning correctly, so this is working, making the circuit boards, and then it should export them out into the circuit assembling machine. Oh, so first it's making the refined assemblies for, yeah, there we go. So now we're making the HV circuits at refined tier. So I'm just going to hold this to complete the quest. There we go. If you look in the top right and we press this, there we go. So now we have everything we need to make refined mainframes. This actually arguably is simpler than the refined computer, except for the fact obviously that it uses two. But I've already encoded the stainless steel frame, It's just an IC1 recipe with 3 stainless steel plates and 5 stainless steel rods. So if we just go ahead and encode the actual recipe for the main frame itself, this one here, and we chuck it in our circuit assembly machine, just here, we should be able to autocraft one. Now it's going to need to craft a couple of circuits first. It says we're missing copper foil. Do we not have a recipe for copper foil? Oh, it seems we don't, so I guess we need to encode that then. Easy enough, just in the cluster mill. Bang, bang, chuck that in there, and now we should be able to make one. There we go. So we have everything. Press start, and it's working away. Now while that's crafting up, I'm just going to talk a little bit about where we're going to go next. So we've now finished the MV age, once we've completed this quest down here for the refined mainframe. And we're into the HV age. Now there are a few ways to enter this quest line here. The first one is through the vacuum freezer, to get Kanthal Coils, which allows us to upgrade our silicon balls. I'll talk more about this when we do so later. The second way is producing epoxy, which is sort of a slightly involved chemical process that we have to set up, which allows us to get our microcomputers and microcircuits, which allows us to get the micro mainframe, which is our IV circuit. And then the third one, which is the main entry we're going to take here, is down to get titanium. Now the reason we want titanium is because when combined with this chemical line here for rocket fuel and this line here which gets us some other bits and bobs, it allows us to go to the moon, which unlocks a bunch of other planets, and it also allows us to get a bunch of resources which we would otherwise not have access to in the same quantities. Now unlike the other staple ingots of the machine tiers, so steel we've got LV, aluminium is MV, and stainless steel is HV, titanium at EV actually requires a bit of a, it's relatively simple, but it does require some sort of a chemical loop. And it also requires the vacuum freezer, so we're going to have to do that as well. But if we take a look at the recipe for a titanium ingot here, we need to cool down a hot titanium ingot in a vacuum freezer, which we'll need to make. And a hot titanium ingot we get from titanium dust in an EBF. We can also do this recipe here. In fact, I think we are going to do this recipe here. So what this does here is we use titanium tetrachloride and magnesium dust. Magnesium's easy enough to get. And that gives us a hot titanium, but it also gives us magnesium chloride. Now this might get a bit complicated, so I'll explain it once I've set it up. But the magnesium chloride we can electrolyse into magnesium and chlorine. Now this is a loop in the sense that the magnesium chloride that comes out of the reaction gives us enough magnesium and enough chlorine to redo the recipe. So it gives us enough chlorine here to do this chemical reaction for titanium tetrachloride, and it gives us enough magnesium to put back into the EBF to make another ingot. Now carbon dust is easy enough to get, we've already talked about that. Rutile is the only input of the system. Rutile we're going to get through ore processing bauxite at the moment, although later on I think once we reach the moon we'll have a more sustainable way of getting this. And it gives us carbon monoxide and titanium tetrachloride. So the titanium tetrachloride goes into the EBF, and the carbon monoxide we can actually electrolyse to get our carbon dust back, so that loops as well, and it also gives us some excess oxygen. So the only input for the titanium system is going to be rutile, and then the outputs that we're going to get are going to be our titanium ingots obviously, and a little bit of oxygen. Oxygen we're not too worried about, titanium ingots is what we really want to get. So our refined mainframe has finished crafting, so I'm just going to grab this and go into the quest book, and there we go, we've completed the MV chapter. Except for these quests here and this one here, but they're not too important. And now we're ready to make our titanium. Okay, so I've set up the titanium loop here. Now there is one issue, which I'm sure many of you spotted during that little montage there, but I built this EBF with copper nickel coil blocks, which actually means that we can't do this recipe here because this requires Kanthal. And so basically the way that this works is there are different tiers of coils, and as you upgrade the tiers of coils, and they just use different things to make, you increase the temperature of the blast furnace. Now that doesn't increase the speed, it just basically allows you to unlock more recipes. You can increase the speed by upgrading the energy hatch. But we're going to need to upgrade these to Kanthal before this loop can start processing. So these machines here are all working fine. We're getting magnesium and titanium tetrachloride. And in order for this EBF to work, we just need to upgrade the coils and then we're all sorted. But first I'm just going to go over what these machines here do. So this HV chemical reactor here mixes rutile, carbon and chlorine to make titanium tetrachloride and carbon monoxide. The carbon monoxide goes down into this basic electrolyzer here where it's electrolyzed to the carbon dust back, which then gets back input into here. This electrolyzer here will take the byproduct of this reaction in the EBF once we've upgraded the coils, which will make our magnesium chloride dust, and then that goes back into here and gets electrolyzed for chlorine and magnesium. The magnesium gets put back into here and the chlorine gets put back into here. So as I mentioned earlier, the only input is rutile. Now rutile is quite difficult to get because we get it through bauxite processing, but the actual bauxite ore itself isn't available until we reach the moon, which we're going to do next episode. So we have to use bauxite dust, which we get from ore processing aluminium. But this is a chance byproduct of processing through aluminium, and then we have to electrolyze 39 at a time for only 6 rutile. So at the moment titanium is quite hard to come by, but once we get to the moon next episode we're going to find abundances of bauxite and it'll be much easier to increase our titanium production. Now this EBF obviously outputs the magnesium chloride, which I talked about, but it also outputs our hot titanium ingot. Now that hot titanium ingot gets exported via the ME system up into this vacuum freezer here, which I've got running at medium voltage. And what this does is this essentially cools all of the hot ingots, except from the hot iron ingot because that's not technically a hot ingot, but it cools all of the hot ingots into their original ingots. So we're going to input the hot titanium in here, and out of that we'll get our final titanium ingot. The reason iron isn't technically a hot ingot is because real hot ingots you can't actually hold because otherwise you take damage. So the only way to transport them is via conduits or in your ME system or something of that nature. So let's get work on upgrading those EBF coils to Kanthal then. So in order to do that, we obviously need 16 Kanthal coil blocks, which are made in an assembler with 144 millibuckets of copper each, 8 mica insulator foil. Now that's the same as our copper nickel coils. I don't think it uses copper though, but that's easy enough to get. And then we need Kanthal wire. Now obviously to get Kanthal wire we need Kanthal ingots, which we get from freezing down a hot Kanthal ingot in the vacuum freezer using the process I just talked about. And the hot Kanthal ingot is made in an EBF with copper nickel coils, so we can just use one of these two over here. And to get the Kanthal dust, it's aluminium dust, iron dust and chrome dust. So I've made up some more chrome dust here. Apparently we only have 3, I'm not sure what's going on there. Oh, this is full, that'll be why. So I need to empty this. But we're going to get some more chrome. We've got some aluminium in here, and we should have some iron over in the system. Yeah, so we can make our first pieces of Kanthal here. Now we're going to need a lot more than 9, but I'm going to chuck these in the EBF over here. Now I did mention obviously that hot ingots do burn you when you're holding them, and that is going to be a bit of an issue, but I'm just going to transfer them from the EBF to the vacuum freezer. It's not too far of a distance, so I shouldn't die in the time it takes me to carry over a couple of ingots. So if we chuck these in here, I'm just going to disconnect this conduit quickly just so it doesn't extract it automatically into the ME system. And the recipe's going. Now it's an 80-second recipe, which isn't particularly long in comparison to some of the others, but it's also not particularly quick. So I'm just going to go ahead and get the rest of the Kanthal that we need for the coils, and then I'll catch you when we're ready to turn it into wires. So I've got 2 stacks of our mica insulator foil, 2 stacks of our 2x Kanthal wire, and 2,304 millibuckets of copper. Now if we put this into this assembling machine, we should have everything we need to get our 16 Kanthal coils. There we go. So if I just place the integrated circuit back in, and we go and plop these down on the blast furnace, I've already removed these copper nickel ones, so we just need to place them in. I might need to do maintenance again actually, I've just realised. Oh no. But as you can see, the titanium recipe is now running. So that is going to use our magnesium and our titanium tetrachloride, and it's going to make us our titanium and our magnesium chloride. And as soon as this is done, we should get our first titanium ingot. We should see the hot ingot come through first in the vacuum freezer, and then once that's done its thing, we should have a titanium ingot in our applied logistics system. There we go. Our vacuum freezer is now cooling down and it's making titanium, and our system is looping around the carbon and the magnesium chloride to create us more titanium tetrachloride, so this thing should keep running as long as we have rutile to input into the system, which it looks like currently we actually don't have. So now that we've got our titanium infrastructure set up, and as long as we have rutile we can keep creating titanium, I think that's a good place to leave this episode where it is. We've done quite a lot today, mostly in terms of infrastructure in the base, although we've also made some decent progression in terms of titanium and the vacuum freezer. Thank you for watching episode 7, and if you enjoyed the video please do leave a like. If you're enjoying the series please don't forget to subscribe, and if there's anything you think I can do better or want to see changed in the next episode, please do leave a comment letting me know. Thanks for watching. Bye.